This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
Coffee-fueled stories. Hello. It's me, Michelle, your pocket DJ and host of Coffee Fueled Stories, a show where storytelling and coffee hang out. Today's special guest is cozy mystery author and journalist Tara Lush. Hello, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you are actually my introduction to cozies.
I'm so glad to hear that.
I never read a cozy book. I had no idea what a cozy was. And your cozy coffee series just spoke volumes to me. And I loved it. And so to have you on the show this is like so huge for me. So I'm going to gush. So thank you so much for agreeing to spend some time and talk about your books.
Well, thanks. I love to hear that. That's what I like to hear. I was not a cozy mystery author in the beginning. And so I too have found it a little later in life. I'd been a mystery reader, but I adore cozy mysteries. I actually think they should just be called mysteries, but I get it. And I'm so glad to hear that you enjoyed the series.
I did. I love like Purgatory. Like I would totally wear a shirt that says like I hang out at Purgatory or Purgatory latte. Like speaking of which, so I'm hoping you can see my shirt today. So for the listeners out there, I am wearing this is the kitty cat.
Oh, that's great.
So this shirt, I did a little collaboration with Skytop Coffee, and this is Bill Purry. And I had to laugh because your character of Fred Mercury in your book, I was like, so I have to wear the Bill Purry shirt and Fred. Yes.
And he's in a little astronaut thing. And it's similar to what my character sees because he's in one of those backpacks that have like a window and looks like an astronaut. That's hilarious. I love that shirt.
That's awesome. Awesome. So let's talk briefly. I know, so you just came out with Eat, Pray, Hacks.
Yes.
And we will talk about that because it is your newest book. But I do want to ask you a few questions about your journalism background, because I too was a journalist before I got into English as a major.
Nice.
I don't want to stick words in your mouth, but if it bleeds, it leads, right? That was kind of the philosophy.
Absolutely. Yes.
And it seems like because you have integrity, you worked for the Associated Press, which is one of my favorite news sources. That was like one of the heartbreaking things about journalism is if it bleeds, it leads. Yes?
Yeah, there were many heartbreaking things about journalism. I mean, journalism is and remains and will always remain my first love. Journalism broke my heart many times and broke many people's hearts many times. It's a noble profession and it's not at all respected these days. And I feel terribly for that. I met some of the most amazing people who are journalists. They're the most witty, smart people I've met. I miss it terribly. But so here's the thing. I was a journalist for 30 years and I started at a small newspaper and I started when I was about 20. And I started at a radio station, but then I quickly went to a small newspaper and I worked my way up to the Associated Press. And by the end, I was covering, politics and mass shootings and executions. I discovered that, over the years, I discovered that I'm actually really good at breaking news and crime stories. I spent many years in Florida as a crime reporter. A lot of the crimes and things that are mentioned in my mysteries are things that I've covered or read about or have some experience with. In fact, when I started writing romance fiction, my very oldest and best friend said to me, "What are you doing? Why are you writing romance? Why aren't you writing crime fiction?" And she's a big reader and she knows that I love romance. And I was like, I can't go down that path. I can't go down that dark path because I have witnessed 13 executions, in Florida's death chamber. And I've covered, I covered the Pulse shooting. I've covered a lot of very, very difficult things. And ultimately, That's what made me leave journalism, because I couldn't do it anymore. Emotionally. So, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to cover anything dark. I don't want to write anything dark. I told my best friend I'm writing romance. And so, fast forward 9 years, I had written a romance series. It was a 5-book series, and it was set in a small town on a small island in Florida. And it was about a family, and each family member got like their happy ever after with love. But it also had things like, a quirky town, like quirky characters around town, and everybody became friends and everybody did wacky things together, and it had a farting pug. And I was like, people really aren't, like, the readers aren't enjoying like my quirkiness. Like, why is that? And then I thought, am I in the right genre? What could I do that I could use my crime expertise and the quirkiness? And it's like, oh, hello, this cozy mystery is right in your face. And so I sat down and I wrote Grounds for Murder. And within a month, I had an offer on it from Crooked Lane. And then my 4th book in that series comes out in January, in fact. And I dedicated that book to my friend who said, you should be writing crime fiction. Part of me still thinks that I probably would be best at like noir or police procedural. I'm not ready to go there yet, but there may be a thriller in me. I'm not saying no at this point, because I've said no to never to a lot of things, like a paranormal mystery. And then here I am writing it. And it's been my best launch. So I don't know. Yeah. But this is what I wanted to say.
Yes.
The thing that I'm best at in this world is breaking news and crime journalism. But the thing that I am best at is the thing that is the worst for my mental health. And that's why I left journalism.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And my experience was kind of the same. I started out as a journalism major. Now, mind you, I just stayed at the college level, community college level. So I started out as like a guest writer, and then I got to know, the staff. And then I was the assistant editor 1 year. And then my executive editor kind of took me under his wing and trained me. And then I became the executive editor the next year. And so again, it was this experience and exposure, just at the college level, community college level. And then something just told me, you know what, this just doesn't feel right. And Christiane Amanpour is like, that was, I wanted to be her. I wanted to be at that level, a foreign correspondent with integrity, but the news just wasn't going in that direction. And I was like, you know what, this just doesn't feel right. So I had the same. And so I switched from journalism to English, but journalism still has a massive place in my heart because I love the succinctness of writing. And that was one of the issues that I had as an English major. They wanted me to be more flowery.
I have to say that has been a thing with writing fiction, especially romance fiction, not as much mystery. I think my writing is much more, with romance, you have to really write with lots of emotion, obviously. I mean, that's kind of the hallmark of the genre, right?
Right.
I've sort of discovered that, that's really not my forte, and mystery is a far better fit because of that. I think journalism, either I'm not an empathetic person or journalism kind of beat that out of me, but it's hard for me, even as a romance author, and I'm a Rita finalist. Like, I was a finalist for RWA's Rita Awards for romance, but I still read romance. And when that, if somebody's, the couple is met after 2 days and they're like, this is my soulmate, I'm like, yeah, right. Like, I'm like the least romantic person ever. So mysteries are just a far better fit, but I love romance, and I have a romance coming out in January and I love it, but it's still just, mysteries are a lot easier.
Have you noticed how Coffee Fueled Stories doesn't have any ads? That's because I work tirelessly to keep this show alive. After 3 years on my own, I've decided I need to ask for your help. I've never asked anyone to subscribe. I've never asked anyone to leave a review. I've never asked anyone to rate the show. And I've never asked anyone to pay to listen. There are a few ways you can help support the show. I've created a Patreon page, Coffee Fueled Stories, and a subscription section on my podcast website. It's simple to support and help me keep my dream alive. Just click the link in the show notes to set up your paid subscription option. It's that easy. Thank you for your support.
it's your training, it's your background, it's your exposure, it's what you were in that field. I can totally relate. I had the only time I almost cried in grad school was I got called into office hours, and she was like, "What was your major before you came here? Where did you get your degree? Where did you get your degree?" I said, "Well, I started out as a journalism major, at Cal State Fullerton." "Oh, that explains it." And I was like, "Explains what?" Like, and I think maybe I didn't even know your background. I just read all I did was type in coffee cozy mystery.
Oh,
And
good. I'm glad it came up.
in iBooks, right?
Yeah. Oh,
And
good.
your book was in there, and I was like, "Grounds for Murder." Oh, that sounds great. I'm going to check that one out. So I looked into it. I was like, and I downloaded the sample, because I always download a sample before I buy a book. So I downloaded the sample, and I was like, "Oh, I have to have this book." Like, so I read the sample, and I was just like, "This is so right up my alley." So again, you had the mystery, you had the coffee, you had the quirky characters, and you had the silly, town, and your succinctness. And by the way, I am a huge Noah fan.
Oh,
I am
good.
absolutely in love with Noah. I
Noah
love
is
him.
like the antithesis of every romance hero I've ever written.
I love him.
And honestly, like I really grappled with trying to write him because I was working on edits on that book in 2020. Actually, it was my last year in journalism. I was covering the pandemic, covering politics, covering, total insanity here in Florida. I live in Florida. And most of my journalism experience has been here in Florida. And I was really worried about portraying police in a certain light, given the events of 2020. I think I try to be mindful of that and try to be thoughtful, because I am a white author. I am writing books that have traditionally, I think we can all agree that a lot of crime fiction has had a lot of, so-called propaganda in it, like putting the police in an unnecessarily positive light. And I really tried to make it so that Noah represented something different for police, and that he had worked for internal affairs at his prior department and was really criticized for it. I tried. I don't know. But I love Noah too.
Yeah, there's just something, the second you introduced him, I don't really know much about this guy, but I want to know more.
Hopefully you'll read to book 4. Book 4 comes out January 9th. And so there's some major developments with Noah in book 4.
Oh, very cool. So I've only read 1 and 2.
Okay.
Cold Brew Corpse. So I promise you, we will get to Eat, Pray, Hex. But before we do that, I just want to say, I don't know if my love of horror kind of came in, but when I was reading Cold Brew Corpse and her formula just kept tasting off, I was like, "Tara, don't you dare. Don't you dare."
That's so funny, because another reader said something similar, and it's like I wouldn't even think of that, because I'm not a horror consumer at all. So I was like, what? And then it dawned on me what people would think, and I was like, oh my God, I would have never thought of that. Like, for all of my wild experiences, I'm actually in my mind this very wholesome, oh, I wouldn't even think of that. So it's kind of funny.
The whole time, I had a little bit of anxiety when she would go and do the batches, and I would be like, knowing that it is a cozy, it kind of kept me a little protected, so to speak. And then I was like, I don't think she's gonna do anything really gory or graphic. That's the whole point of cozies, is it lacks that, and that's why we like it. But I was a little bit on edge every time she was doing that. I was like, where are we going with this?
Yeah, I will say that I do like to play with the edge of cozies. I actually, I can't say with who, but I just signed a contract with a publisher for a slightly more edgy cozy in the vein of A for Aunties. It's sort of with even younger characters than Lana and the people in in the coffee cozy. It's about an alligator trapper here in Florida. It is a little edgier. I don't want to say it's spicy. There's no open door sex, but I will say that there is a makeout scene with the hot professor dude who's the hero, and then a cat grabs his butt. So it's funnier, and it's I'm really looking forward to that because I think I'm very excited about that.
That sounds interesting, and your covers are really cool, by the way. Like, I especially Eat, Pray, Hex. Like that one is just I looked at it a couple times. So I would be reading the story, and you would introduce something, and then I would go and refer to it because I was like, I think that's in the cover. So let's go ahead and switch to. Oh wait, one last question. I just came across my notes. Do you still have clippings of your articles from any of the quote unquote like newspapers? Like, did you do any of like your clippings, so to speak?
I have the very first, so my very first newspaper job was at I'm sure it's not there anymore. It's called the Pembroke Reporter, and it's a newspaper in Pembroke, Massachusetts. I do still have a couple of those papers because I would write everything. Like it was a weekly paper. So like I would write like the town council article and the man on the street article and the feature article and the crime article. So I have a couple of those. I think I have the first paper that I wrote. So I do have those. I probably have a few from like election day. Maybe I don't have a lot. I don't keep, my house is very small and I don't keep a lot of stuff. I'm not very sentimental about my time in journalism.
That makes sense. I wanted to say for your Eat, Pray, Hex, these are a couple of just like my quick notes as I was starting to read. On page 6, quote, mold, dust, and creepy secrets. That was a great line. Like, I just loved how you introduce us to the Crescent Moon Inn. And it says, and then you also, here's a quote, it's a spooky inn with that Tim Burton would be jealous. Like, I really like how you were setting the vibe because again, it's very different from Purgatory and Devil's Beach. Is that? Mm-hmm. So I only know that world mostly, and so you're introducing us to Cypress Grove. Just the way that you take us into the scene, into your world. I thought those were really those two things just struck me. And I was like, yes, I was like, let's get into this story.
Thanks.
Is there really a psychic capital of the world in Florida?
Well, actually, so the inspiration for this whole, I prior to like last year, I was like, oh, I will never write a paranormal story. Like I tinkered with a vampire story on Wattpad and kind of abandoned it. I kind of like vampires. I'll have to say, in romance fiction, I'm okay with vampires. I'm not super into like other paranormal romance. I don't read a lot of paranormal. I'm actually a very literal person. I'm not super into historical fiction or fantasy. I'm actually reading Legends and Lattes right now. And I'm shocked that I love it because I'm so not into, like, I don't even know what an orc is. Like, I have no idea. Like, I don't know. I don't even know if it matters. But so I was so, I never imagined that I would write paranormal, right? Like, but then last year in November, I went to visit my dad. I'm from California. I went to visit my dad. And we went to this little tiny town called Folsom, California. It's where Johnny Cash sang Folsom Prison Blues, right? And it's like the Sierra foothills, like a tiny gold rush town with like a downtown and old buildings, like Old West style. And we saw this hotel, this old hotel called the Folsom Hotel that had been turned into a tavern. So my dad, we're the Lush family, so we, of course, have to go have a drink, and we did. And it turns out it's this old Gold Rush hotel that looks so spooky inside. Like I just walked around thinking, I need to write about this. I don't know how or what's going on, but I need to write about this, and there has to be ghosts. And I was like, no, but I'm not that. I write about Florida and beaches and whatever. No. And so I kept thinking about it and kept thinking about it. And I kept thinking about another town in Florida called Casadega. And that is known as the psychic capital of the world. Like it's a place where it's a real life place where there's psychics and mediums. And it's also, there's also a Casadega in New York State, and it's where the spiritualists settled here and in New York. And it's pretty well known. So I just kind of riffed on that. And this summer, I really started thinking seriously about the plot and about how I wanted a midlife heroine, someone closer to my own age. And I just wanted it to be quirky, and I wanted to release it as an indie book. And so I did. I commissioned the cover, and I found a great designer. And I actually wrote that book in 2 months, and I'm almost done with book 2 that comes out in December. So this whole series has been the best book launch I've ever had in any genre. And people are really liking it. And I'm so thrilled. And I can't wait to write more. I'm just super into this world, and I hope it shows.
It does. I really like that you had the Haunted Hearth Bakery. You had like these, again, it was such a different world from Purgatory, the Purgatory world. And what's funny is because that's called Purgatory and Devil's Island, and this is it felt very Florida, but I don't mean that like in like a negative way.
Yeah.
I'm also from California, Southern California. So to be in this town, Cypress Grove, and the characters that you've created, Sage cracks me up. Her character is just so I really enjoyed where you took us with this tale. And the recipes, I love that you threw the recipes in there as well. So I mean, you really went. It's like you just really jumped in. Like it felt like you gave it all.
I tried. Like it felt like that. And I think about this story. I think about this series night and day, and I feel like it's going in places that I never imagined my mind going to. Like, I think it's going to be a mixture that, and this won't be a spoiler, but in this book, the heroine, Amelia, she tries to solve a cold case homicide. And I think the series will be kind of a mixture of cold cases and new homicides. And I really just want to showcase like middle-aged people, like doing fun things and having lives and having love and to some degree, this is almost is more paranormal women's fiction than mystery. I mean, it is a mystery, but it also kind of falls into this genre of paranormal women's fiction that's become really popular on KU. So I'm kind of going for that as well. This is really a kind of a love letter to midlife, and at a time when nobody wants to have a love letter to midlife.
I love it. And I think that's, again, I just felt so many different things with this story, this book, than the coffee series. Like, don't get me wrong, I am a huge fan of the coffee series. I love coffee, thus coffee fueled stories.
Right.
But I really did enjoy this one, and especially because of what like I said, it just really felt like you just went all in. And that was actually going to be my questions, like, how did this come about? But you already answered that, so that's totally awesome. So now let's get to know you a little bit. I'd like to ask you some questions based off of some of the information that I pulled from your book. Sure. So in there, you reference she's a new wave kind of girl. So what would be some of your favorite bands, some of your 80s new wave things?
Oh, gosh. The Cure, The Smiths, Bauhaus, New Order, like the usual suspects. I was definitely like, I also really liked a lot of like punk rock back in the day, the Circle Jerks, the Dead Kennedys, Sex Pistols, Black Flag. I saw Henry Rollins a couple of years ago do spoken word. I mean, that's where like, I am like a mild-mannered, like if you look at me on Instagram, I'm like a mild-mannered her, but if you saw me when I was 16, and I'm actually trying to get some of this into book 2. I'll just say that in book 2, there's the introduction of a recurring ghost character from the 80s, and her name is Tiffany, and she will reappear, and she's becoming one of my favorite characters. She's like a new wave ghost.
That is so okay. So I would have never known this about you ever. No. And I feel like we just became best friends because those are all my favorite bands. Those are the shows that I went to, all the t-shirts, all the posters that I had. Like like K-Rock was my favorite radio station. I
K-Rock.
Grew up on K-Rock, Kevin and Bean, all of those guys. So like, seriously, I'm even more happy if I could be even more happier to know all of these things about you. Like,
I grew up, so I grew up in Northern California and Vermont, and I went to college in Boston. And I was when I was in college in Boston in between like 1988 and 92 ish, I was really into like the alternative music scene. I dated a DJ from WBCN, which was the big station at the time. And, you know, I saw like Nirvana play, and I interned at the local radio station, and the Chili Peppers kissed me and asked me to their show. I was like 18. You know, I was completely like a club kid in those days. You know, like I went to shows a lot more than I studied. So yeah.
Okay. So Hollywood was not that far from where I was. And I really didn't want to be in school either.
Yeah.
I hung out at the Whiskey A Go-Go, at the Roxy. We would hang out in the parking lot at the Rainbow because we knew all of the famous, you know, up and coming bands. And it was, I was there during the time of like when Warrant had just gotten signed. So the hair bands, right? The hair bands were starting out. And
I have to say, I have thought about a cozy mystery or a mystery series or a romance series set in the hairband era of LA.
Please do
like,
that.
It is so like, I watched that Motley Crue. It was like the biopic, and it was like, this is insane. I forgot about all this. Motley Crue is just ridiculous and funny and awesome. So I don't know. I feel like that's an untapped thing, the hair bands of the 80s.
Oh my, yes.
I've seen Motley Crue like 3 times, and I wouldn't even like them. I had access to like, I was like young and far cooler and far cuter back then. So I had access to a lot of shows for free. So I've seen a lot of bands.
That is so cool. And having a press pass, like, so when I was in community college, I had the press pass, and it was in Orange County. And so I would go to several events in Orange County. One of them was the Orange County Music Awards. And I just loved having my little press pass, and they would take us, you would get allowed into extra, so you could like hang out with the musicians, and you weren't considered, you know, like one of the fans. So I always had my notepad, and, you know, and I always looked professional. I'm going to have to send you one of my stories. Nice. I went to, I can't remember his name now, but he is a like a rock and roll icon. He's one of the guys who came out with the guitars, like his literally the name, it's a surf music. He's like he's a famous, it's like I said, he's stripping.
Like
anyway,
Dick Dale.
That's him.
Yep.
Dick Dale. I met Dick Dale when he was getting the award, the Lifetime Achievement Award. And I sat next to him, and I always try to make sure I smell good. And so I was wearing my pretty perfume, and I sat next to him, and and this is the opening line of it. And he literally goes, "You smell good." And I was like, have you ever been smelt up by a rock and roll icon? Nice. I have.
That's awesome.
That was the opening line. Awesome. I do have that clipping.
That is awesome.
But right, like that would have never happened if I was just, you know, in the show. Like and we did an article. We actually wrote the article for our school newspaper. Nice. But to have that happen, I was just like, this is the world I want. I want to be in this world. Yeah. I want to hang out with these people and have these experiences.
Totally. That's awesome.
Okay. So as we are continuing to get to know you, and this is, like I said, this is so cool. So the fact that you have been exposed to like some of my favorite bands, like seriously, like I feel like you and I could probably sit and hang out at a coffee shop and talk about bands and shows that we've seen and journalism and things of that nature. Totally. So let's continue to get to know you.
Yeah.
You mentioned coffee, and you also have the Coffee Lover series. How much coffee in a day do you drink, and what is your go-to coffee?
Okay, so I have to back up when I started writing. So as a journalist, okay, I'm going to back up even more. I did not drink coffee like growing up or as a teenager. Obviously, in the 80s, it wasn't like as widespread as it was now. And coffee was something my mother drank. Like that was her liquid, you know, like I associated coffee with my mother. And so when I was in college and when I graduated, and I didn't drink coffee at all in college, at all. And when I graduated from college and got my first journalism job, my mother was like, all right, it's time to be a woman. You have to get your first Mr. Coffee Maker. So she went and got me a Mr. Coffee Maker. And I started drinking like sort of bad coffee because I figured I was a journalist. It was like something that I had to do. And it was like, you know, usually you could like get a coffee, like you were covering the county commission and you could get like a crappy cup of coffee and go talk to the smokers outside for the dirt, you know? So I just sort of continued drinking my crappy coffee for decades as a journalist because That's what you drank. And then also when I had to file, like I traveled a lot. So Starbucks was like my go-to because they had great Wi-Fi. I could get points. They had consistent drinks. And I usually, no matter where I went, I could find a Starbucks. So although I will say I liked Dunkin' Donuts coffee also for, like if we're talking chain coffees. So fast forward to when I was writing the coffee book, it sort of occurred to me that I should probably have more coffee details in my books. I actually am a big fan of Cleo Coyle's Coffee House Mysteries that are set in New York City that I love. And I know that she has a ton of coffee details in those books. I didn't want to do that much, but I wanted some. And at the time I was writing those, actually it was in late 2019, there was someone in my town of St. Petersburg, Florida, who was holding craft coffee tours. And so basically what you would do is you would go on this tour and you would go to different cafes with this guy, and he would explain to you like the different methods of brewing, the different beans, the different roasts, just everything from soup to nuts. And then he would take you back. He worked for a coffee wholesaler, and he would take you back to his lab and you would do a coffee cupping. So I became friends with him, and he actually helped me create some of the drinks in the books of the coffee books. And so I was drinking a lot of coffee at that time. In fact, I drank a lot of coffee, multiple cups a day, until this summer when it just got so hot here in Florida that for some reason coffee, I like coffee with oat milk in it. It got too heavy for me. Like it just, the heat. And so I switched to iced tea, and I've been drinking tea for a solid few months now. Like I'll have a coffee every now and then. But for whatever reason, and maybe because I'm not writing one of the coffee books at the moment, I have not been drinking a lot of coffee. You're the first person I've told that. Like I'm just drinking tea. It's kind of weird. I don't know. I'm really into London fog lattes right now.
Those are yummy.
They really are.
Yeah.
And I've kind of like figured out how to make them at home, and I really like them. But for coffee that I love lately, so I like a lot of iced coffee for obvious reasons because I'm here in Florida. I really like Jot instant coffee. It's not instant coffee, it's concentrated coffee.
Yeah.
It comes in a glass jar, and you only put in a tablespoon of the stuff in, and I find their coffee really good. I also really like Stock cold brew that you can buy from the grocery store. It's a very mellow on the stomach brew. So those are the two things. And then there's a coffee shop that I will give a shout out to because I've written there before, Bandit Coffee in St. Petersburg. Super cool place. And they have, maybe I should go get one this week. In the fall, they have a maple bourbon latte. Yum. Which is like, it's not alcoholic. It's just bourbon flavor. Yeah. And it's so tasty with almond milk. It's just delicious. So that is my favorite current coffee, is the maple bourbon latte.
Nice. Yeah, there's seasonal coffees, like especially now, like and like you said, craft coffee, like same thing. I grew up, Denny's was where I hung out and I wrote with my friends. That's what we did. And Denny's isn't exactly known for its coffee, but that's what we drank. Yep. And that's what we were exposed to. And then when the coffee shops kind of started popping up every now and then, in the late 80s, we would get very excited. We're like, oh my God, there's an espresso place. We got to go check it out. And so, we would hit the e-bars, but for the most part, the e-bars were never really open at the hours that we were up. So there we had to go back to Denny's and hang out at Denny's and drink coffee. So same thing. I grew up drinking really crappy coffee, not really understanding good coffee. Every now and then being exposed to some good coffee, but not being able to have good coffee. So the fact that we actually have craft coffee and that you can seriously, coffee is, it's everywhere now. Thank God.
I will say this. I have to say the one thing that shocked me most about writing the Coffee Lovers series is that I have a couple of reviews from people who said they've never had a latte before and who didn't know about latte art. And I just assume I'm not really sure, but I just assume there are people out there who like the coffee culture has not reached. I know in my particular city in Florida, it's kind of a hipster. I say that I live in like an oasis in Florida. Like I live in I don't want to get political. I live in a really good little oasis of Florida that's not like the rest of Florida. Like no one, like there's not a lot of insanity here on any level, crime, politically or otherwise. Like I live in a very somewhat normal place for that. And so coffee's everywhere here, but maybe there are places where coffee is not everywhere. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't been exposed to the places that only have like say Folgers as an option.
Right.
Like if, you spend the night in the hotel and the next morning it's instant Folgers or something like that. I mean, I don't know.
I have to say this too. So my husband is from Italy. So his coffee culture, like we go visit his family in Italy and it's like they are sucking down espressos, like little thimble, like by the end of the day, you're just like, and he has to, when he goes, he has to stop drinking coffee for a couple of weeks when he comes back because he's so like worked up about the coffee. But every time his family comes to visit us, they bring a new mocha pot, and they bring coffee from Italy because they are not entirely convinced that I am going to serve them good coffee. So we have a couple of mocha pots and my husband does take those out pretty frequently. So I will have an espresso. And obviously here in Florida, the other wonderful thing, a little more when we lived in Miami, but the Cuban coffee is unbelievable. Like the Cuban coffee, like the thimblefuls of the cortaditos. In fact, if you love those, if you love that, you should check out Raquel Reyes, Cuban, like she has a Cuban American cozy mystery series out of Miami, and there's a lot of coffee, and also the heroine in that series is a food anthropologist, and it's a wonderful series. And I say if you like mine, you'll probably like hers because it has a lot of like different side of Florida, but super interesting. It's set in Miami, and there's a lot of food references, and a lot of like Caribbean, Latin American food references. So that's a great series to check out.
Oh, I'm in. You had me at Cafecito, so I'm totally there. And I've never had a Cuban sandwich, so one of these days I will have a Cuban sandwich.
Oh my gosh! Well, that's a big thing here, but yes,
right. Okay, so since we're talking food now, since we're going down this, you mentioned a mango cobbler in Eat Pray Hack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh my God! Like.
Yeah, I'm sure it does exist. The reason why I thought of it is because I was thinking of Liz. So that particular character that was on, I guess we can say this isn't a spoiler. So in Eat, Pray, Hex and in this whole series, there's a part of the cemetery, a part of the local cemetery that has gravestones, and there are recipes written on gravestones. And this is actually a real thing. So there's somebody who has a TikTok channel she goes around and she films these gravestones with recipes. They're not all in the same place. They're sporadic everywhere. But in my book, it's like a town competition who's putting their recipe on their gravestone. And the mango cobbler came from one of the sidekicks' grandmothers who was Cuban American. And I was thinking of all the Cuban food I ate in Miami, especially like guava pastry and mango, flavored. And we had a mango tree in Miami. So, we had mangoes every year and I miss it. So the idea of a mango cobbler, like it makes sense to me, like warm mango fruit with cobbler topping. Like, why not? But maybe eventually I'll do that recipe. I'll think about that recipe. But for now, at least in that particular series, the recipes are all going to be probably cookie recipes.
Makes sense.
That because Amelia is a cookie expert. Yes. And so I've been taste testing recipes for book 2.
Very cool. So since she's the cookie expert, my question to you is, what is your favorite cookie?
Oh, well, I actually I love chocolate chip. I don't eat a lot I'm mostly vegan. So, usually I just like, the vegan version of chocolate chip. I did, however, I've been playing with this recipe for book 2. I call it like a pretzel surprise cookie, but it's like pretzels, chocolate chunks, and cherries.
Oh, wow.
And I think that and it actually has oats in it. It's kind of like a weird, chunky, healthy cookie, sort of. So I'm playing with that actually. And I have a friend in Marin County who owns a charcuterie restaurant or a charcuterie business. And she is creating a brown butter cookie for book 3.
Oh my God.
So yeah,
Oh my God. That sounds amazing. That
I
sounds
hope to
amazing.
do like a little cookbook at some point.
Very cool. So do you cook, or is your husband more of the cook?
I cook. My husband cooks too, but I'm the main cook in the house. My husband cleans. He does my husband supports me immensely. He cleans and does all the housework and does all of like the stuff around the house so I can just work and write. But I do cook. I love to cook. I love to bake. I really, really love, I mean, I love food. So I wanted to make, like, there's a few things that I want to make sure in my cozy mysteries. One is that at their core, everybody is really, I mean, other than the murder, at their core, everybody is really kind to each other. Like I try to get that through. And the other thing is I don't want there to be any food shaming. I don't want there to be any fat shaming. I don't want the female characters in the books to worry about their weight. I try to be really mindful of that. Like I just have my characters eating like normal people would and should.
Thank you. And absolutely. And I think we can talk about this without it being a spoiler, but Amelia gets a sample of a few items at the cafe, and a character actually questions and says, "Is all that for you?"
Yes.
And she answers, and she explains her reasoning behind the answer. And I actually I didn't put that in my notes, but that's actually something that I literally was like, thank you for saying that. Thank you for addressing this. So without even having it in my notes, we brought it up. So this is totally awesome. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I felt it was really important. Whenever I feel like read a character who is worked up about her weight and, oh, I'm going to have to do, I can only have a salad. Like it makes me sad. And I just, I think that we need to, especially now after the pandemic and after the 8 or 10 or whatever, however many years it's been that we've had, I feel like we just have to give ourselves a lot of grace, and that as women, we don't. And I want us to, especially in midlife, like, man, Gen X, we are going through some shit. Sorry. We're going through some things. Like, that's like that's the hard part about writing cozies for me. The hardest part is that I can't swear because I have a mouth like a trucker. And Amelia, I hesitated, but one of her catchphrases is like, "Oh, duck me," because I have a whole lore about that. But she says duck instead of the other word that is usually autocorrect. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And it's funny because I feel like my weight journey, I guess you could call it that. I barely weighed enough to get into the Air Force. I barely made it. It was 103 was the minimum to get in. I have now exceeded the maximum that you are supposed to be in. So I like these two numbers are like burned into my brain. 100, I'm not going to tell you the other number, but 103 was the minimum. And then the other number, they would put you on a plan. And I'm above that plan number. And I'm just like, you know what? And now, mind you, I just got back into the gym. I just got back into it. We just had a very, very horrible experience in our previous apartment. We lived above a domestic abuse couple. And we were like terrorized by these people. So we never wanted to leave. So the only time we left was to go and buy groceries. And the only thing that gave us comfort was actually sitting and eating, snacks, because we couldn't go to the gym. Like, it was just a horrible, horrible environment, Tara, horrible. And so now we had to wait until the lease was over before we could move. And so we've now moved. We are now in a much, much better place. I just started going to the gym. We're doing things for our mental health, but we packed on the weight. We didn't know what else to do. We lived in fear every single day, and the only thing that gave us comfort was eating, some Trader Joe's cookies. So this, and like I said, I've never been this heavy in my entire life. But now I'm addressing it. But at the same time, I do give myself grace. I'm like, you know what? I just spent 7 months of hell, and so if I want a cookie right now, it's okay. Like,
it is okay.
It's okay.
It is okay.
Yeah.
And, as we change, and especially women, our bodies change in midlife. And like, I think of my grandmother. My grandmother was 89 when she passed. and she passed of cancer, but it was like a very fast moving cancer. But at one point I said to her friends, I was like, did any of you know she was like losing weight? And they were like, oh, you know, your grandmother, she always wanted to be thin. She was always on a diet. And I was like, she was 88, 89 years old. Like, I don't want to get to the end of my life and have to worry about that. Like, I just, like, I don't want to be unhealthy, obviously, but like, there's like a big spectrum between like unhealthy and like worrying about your weight when you're a normal weight for 88 years old.
Yeah.
So I don't want to waste more time thinking about that, because I think about all the time women have wasted worrying about their weight. And it's like, what else could we have done with this time? And I don't know. It's a form of oppression to me, and I hate it.
It is. I've never been a fan of the beauty magazine, anything that considered itself like a beauty magazine. Like, I didn't read those. I read Bop, Teen Beat. I read Cream, Rolling Stone, Spin, NME, the new music. I read music magazine, so I think that's probably why I have a slightly better confidence, because I didn't have a beauty, quote unquote, beauty magazine telling me about my skin or what, I don't know.
Exactly.
Dick Dale said I smelled good, so I'm going to go with it.
Yeah, that's all you need.
That's all I need. So a couple of questions that I wanted to tap into. So, being that we are of a similar age, you had mentioned the moo-moos.
Yes.
And every time you mentioned moo-moos, all I could think of was Mrs. Roper from Three's Company.
Yes, I know. I've actually more embraced the moo-moo in Florida. It's kind of easier. And once, it's hot, I'm actually wearing like a linen dress that like could kind of be a moo-moo, but it's more like a dress. I'm a real fan of the moo-moo. Like, I really aspire to swan around like a pool with a moo-moo. Like, I have a lot of aspirations in the moo-moo phase. So I'm excited. Honestly.
I could see it. Like, I didn't understand it before, because again, I was a kid watching Mrs. Roper.
Yeah.
But I'm right there with you. I'm like, you know what? It seems like it feels very comfortable and lots of movement.
Lots of air circulation.
So embrace the moo movement. I dig it.
Embrace the moo.
The moo movement. There you go. So you are a fan of coconut and tropical things.
Yes.
Now, have you ever done coconut or tropical things to your coffee? I know we talked about coffee earlier, but have you ever? So this is kind of a question relating back to what we discussed.
Yeah.
Coconut or tropical with your coffee. So
I have not at home, but there is a coffee shop here that does a very nice like coconut tropical themed coffee.
And
it's really
delicious.
Good. Yeah, it's really good. It's like a toasted coconut.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then final question, Freddie Mercury. We talked about him in the very beginning.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask you, like, how did you come up with that name? Like, what's the story behind Freddie Mercury?
I don't know. I mean, so one of the hallmarks of a cozy mystery, generally, not all cozy mysteries have pets, but a lot of them do. And I am a dog owner. I'm a former cat owner. I love both. I would have all of them if my husband allowed, but we live with other people and we have to accommodate their desires too. So I cannot pack my own with dogs and cats. So my first pet in the cozy mystery was Stanley, the Shih Tzu. Yes. I have a Shih Tzu. Stanley was kind of like my Shih Tzu, and plus our other dog who has since passed. And then in the Gator series, I have a cat called Sassy Catsy Klein. And she's named after Patsy Cline for reasons, because the father of the heroine loved Patsy Cline. And then Freddie Mercury, I don't know. Like, I was thinking about funny cat names, and I just thought that was hilarious. And it would make sense that she would love Queen. And I actually think, and this is not, I haven't said this in any story. I may write a bonus scene at some point or put it in. I think Amelia maybe went to Live Aid when she was a teenager. I think maybe her parents were like traveling in London at the time, and she and her brother went to Live Aid, and so saw Freddie Mercury there. So I think that is the impetus for her loving Queen and Freddie Mercury. But I don't know yet. I haven't figured out how she adopted Freddie in California. Like I haven't gotten there yet. And I think at some point I will write like a bonus scene about how she met Freddie.
That is so cool. And like I said, I thought it was interesting as well because I'm familiar with Stanley. And yes, you have a pet in the Cozy series. And so I thought it was very interesting. And this is part of my notes. You've got Stanley in the Coffee series, and now you have Freddie in the Crescent Moon series.
Yes.
As far as the Crescent Moon series, you mentioned also camphor trees. So I know this is going to be like a super like whacked out question, I guess, but I don't know. It was kind of like you made a point to mention the camphor trees. And so I was like, is there something special about the camphor trees in this particular area? Or is it just the type of tree that just happens to be in this area? And I'm going way too deep with this.
There it is. The latter. There are camphor trees. Actually, I was looking at an old hotel in Cassadaga, actually, and it mentioned the camphor trees on the property. And that's why. There's a lot of sort of, as you can imagine, sort of weird flora and fauna that will probably be more in Gator Queen. Gator Queen is going to be heavy on like Florida environment and development in Florida. And like, have you ever read Carl Hyacin? Carl Hyacin is a former newspaper columnist for the Miami Herald who writes crime fiction, but really, really bonkers Florida crime fiction. I like to think of myself as like Carl Hyacin, but not so cynical and political in the work. Carl, he's a really great one to read. But I think there's a real legacy of Florida journalists becoming crime fiction writers. And I think because it's so, there's a lot of inspiration here, not just with the criminals for obvious reasons, but there's a real, I think unlike in most places, there's a real push-pull of like new Florida and old Florida, and Florida never stops growing, building, constructing. It never stops changing. Like I can go 3 miles to downtown and be like, that building was not there yesterday, or that building has been taken down and there's an empty lot. Like there's a lot of, even more so, I think, than California, like there's no real effort to preserve anything here. So it's like this constant state of impermanence. And I try to subtly address that in most of my books. Cool. But yeah, and back to Freddie Mercury. Often in paranormal cozy mysteries, the cats can communicate with the main character. And I made a real decision not to do that because I couldn't wrap my mind around that. But now, as I write, I actually think Freddie Mercury can communicate with other people in the town, but not Amelia. We're finding that out, that he actually has the ability to communicate with others. And Amelia, like I'm kind of approaching that series as Amelia does, because she knows nothing about this world. And so you, the reader, don't either. So in every book, we're going to find out like new and interesting and weird things about her powers and the powers of people in the town.
Very cool. Very cool. I love it. And I'm actually I think it was perfect that you said it in Florida, and you actually used the term woo woo in like the very beginning, and I was like, thank you for saying that, because and I think she actually says it too. She was like, oh really, woo woo, we like this. And it's really funny too, because being that I'm only familiar with the Coffee series, and like I said, that was my introduction into the cozy world, and so I've only read a few cozies, and so to read this one and to be exposed and to kind of have that same like skepticism as the main character, it just kind of feels like you can kind of really connect with her a little bit more, because you're kind of like, what?
Right. That's what I'm going for. And I have to say, so, there's in the Coffee series, there's some new age stuff, because her father is a kind of a new age hippie. And I can say a point about the dad in a minute, but I will say, so I grew up in Northern California and Vermont, and you can infer like everything you need to know about me from that. So I've been also, I wouldn't say that I'm deeply involved in new age, but it's like the concepts are just sort of as part of my life. Like, I wouldn't say that I would never claim to be a witch or into Wicca, but I know some people who are, and I know just in my travels as a person who lived in those two places, you can imagine some of the things that would come of it. So it feels right to me. But in terms of the dad character in the coffee series, that is actually almost entirely based on my real father.
No
like
way.
My father is a 77-year-old pot smoking hippie. He's in California. But yeah, no, it's almost entirely based. Like some of like the fact that, I don't know if you've gotten to this point. I don't know which book you're on. There's a point where the dad starts to love electronic dance music.
I don't think I've only read one and two.
Yeah, I think that may be in book 3. There's a point where the dad like really gets into like EDM.
Yeah.
And he gets high and he listens to EDM. And it's like, that is my dad. Like my dad picked me up from the airport one time and it was like, he's blasting. I'm like, what is this? He's like, it's Tiesto. I'm like, what are you talking about? And so I try to capture, like I had initially thought about having Lana, like a mom or an aunt. Usually in a cozy mystery, there's like an older figure that's like the mentor. And at the time I was writing Grounds for Murder, my dad had a cancer scare. And I'm like, I'm going to make the dad, my dad's fine now. And I'm going to make the dad like my dad because he's so wacky. Like just like literally, and I can say this, he'll never hear this. I mean, I don't care. He wouldn't care. He doesn't care. He has no shame. Like my dad messaged me the other day and said that his scalp itched. And so he went to the urgent care because his scalp was really itchy. And then the next photo I got was of my stepmother putting Selsun Blue all over his head. And I'm like, did you go to the ER for like dandruff? Like what? Like that's the sort of conversation I have. And you can totally see that with Lana and her dad. And so a lot of those conversations that she's had with her dad are like kind of twists on things that I've talked to my dad about.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, so I like the sort of gentle ribbing of the new age lifestyle is kind of plays into a lot of my work.
And I like that. And again, I think I can relate. So I was in the Air Force at the time where I was a vegetarian at the time. And so I got so much crap for being a vegetarian from California at the time in the military. And so they always would call me fruit and nut. They're like, oh, there's the fruit and nut. And I'm like, your walking trail mix is here. Like, I was like, it's, throw the names at me. I'm like, it's not going to hurt. I was like, it's fine. Same thing, like being exposed, Southern California.
Yeah.
I've been exposed to a lot of things. Like you said, I am not one of these things, but I have been exposed to it. Like I actually had a woman who was a friend of mine who worked at a coffee shop. She was actually a witch. And she took me to her house. She showed me her candles. She showed me all of her things. She asked if I wanted to be part of her group of friends.
Right.
And I was just like, thank you for this opportunity. And she's like, you have 24 hours to think about it. And I'm like, I was like, does this mean something?
Right. Does it expire?
Right. And so needless to say, I did not, but I was like, thank you very much for this opportunity and this invitation. And she's like, and you can't tell anyone. And I was like, now mind you, this was like 30 years ago. So I can mention it now. I don't know where she is.
Yes.
I believe she's in Vermont.
Oh, well, there you go. So I will say that, so for book 3 in the Crescent Moon series, part of the storyline is going to be that at the end of book 2, the sort of the leader of there's a coven in Cypress Grove that's like the Generation X coven. So they ask, like the leader asks Amelia to join. And that is going to play a big role in book 3, that like she's going to get ready to be in this Gen X coven. Even though she's not a witch, she has like adjacent powers.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I seriously, thank you so much for hanging out and answering my silly questions for your stories. Like seriously. And like I said, I feel there's something, like I said, there's something special about and it's probably the succinctness. I don't know. Maybe it's because it's not so frou-frou and woo-woo. So
I try to be really sweet without being saccharine.
There you go. There's something, like I said, there's something about it, because like I said, I've read some other series and they just seem heavier. Maybe that's your series seems very light. And I think that's why it speaks to me.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's stuff for every reader. Thank you. I've had really a lot of fun talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna actually before we go, so my tagline, my tagline is "Go forth and be magical," and I would love if you would send us off with a "Go forth and be magical," please.
Go forth and be magical.